Anthony Albanese is a reverse Robin Hood, robbing from the poor to give to the rich and the upper middle class. But in his defense, he's not the first, and in fact, when it comes to energy policy, hurting the poor seems to be a feature and not a bug. My name's Topher Field, this is the Topher Project, and I help busy people like you to understand the world as it changes around you. Anthony Albanese is desperate to buy your vote, and he's willing to lie to get it. And yes, I know the word lie is a dangerous one, but I use it because it's true. The Labor Party are claiming that they are making household batteries cheaper because they're changing who is paying for it. Well, that's not cheaper. That's splitting the bill. That's taxpayer funded. The product is not cheaper. That's a lie. And in fact, I could argue that thanks to the bureaucratic overhead of administrating this scheme, the price has actually gone up. We're just splitting the bill. 70% of the bill is now going to the person who gets that household battery, and 30% of the bill is going to people who don't. This program isn't just a lie, and it isn't just bad policy, it's actually morally wrong. Because as with so many green energy schemes, it rewards the already relatively well off at the expense of the working poor. This election has become a slave auction for control of a tax plantation full of tax slaves. But we are tax slaves being bought with our own tax money and with lies. I need to cover three things, and I'll do it as quick as I can. Firstly, I need to explain why we need household batteries in the first place. Spoiler alert, we need the batteries to make up for the short-sightedness of our rooftop solar subsidies. So now we are literally throwing good money after bad. More on that in a minute. Secondly, I need to explain how this scheme is being funded and why we can predict what will happen in this case, because we've seen it all before. And finally, I'll go over what a progressive versus a regressive policy is and show without doubt that this policy is a complete betrayal of traditional Labor voters, the Aussie battlers, that the Labor Party claim to stand up for. Because this policy makes the cost of energy higher for the working poor so that the relatively wealthy can save money. But before any of that, I want to say thank you. My following on YouTube has doubled this year since I started making daily content like this. And I want to say thank you for the overwhelmingly positive feedback and support. I am 100% viewer supported. I don't have any advertisers or sponsors, nor am I a voice for hire willing to change what I say for money. I am my own man. I say what I think what I say, and it's you that makes it possible for me to pay my bills while I do this. So thank you. And if you haven't already, please head over to goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com and buy a copy of one of my books, or my t-shirts or hoodies, including this net zero design, which is my answer to net zero. I say niet to net zero. I'll put the gas of life back into the atmosphere just as fast as I can. Thank you very much. Niet to net zero. So you can get these books or a DVD of my multi-award winning documentary Battleground Melbourne. Now, full disclosure, you can see this for free online. This is the story of amazing and courageous Victorians who stood against Daniel Andrews and his human rights abuses during the COVID lockdowns. Now, I had the privilege of telling that story, but I didn't write it. It was written by the courage and the action of the people of Victoria. I just told their story, that's all. And when I made this documentary, I promised the people of Victoria that I would keep it available online for free for as long as I could. So it is available for free online at battlegroundmelbourne.com. And if you haven't seen it, then I strongly recommend you check it out tonight. But if you'd like to get a copy to put on your shelf, a DVD to gift to others, or just to support me and help me keep speaking out the way that I am in the future, then goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com is where you'll find the Battleground Melbourne DVD, as well as my books and all my merch. Okay, back to the topic at hand. Why do we need these household batteries in the first place? What problem is this 30% subsidy, which is going to cost billions of dollars, supposed to be solving? Well, it's yet another disastrous consequence of our green energy revolution. The heavy subsidies for rooftop solar worked. We now have millions of homes and businesses with rooftop solar. Remember the promises of free energy? Well, it turns out that political promises aren't always the truth. Who knew? Now we have millions of solar installations and rapidly rising power bills. How does that happen? How do both of those things happen at once when the energy from the sun is free? Because obviously capturing the energy from the sun in the form of electricity, converting it into the right electricity for the grid, and then dispatching it at the exact moment when it is needed requires enormous amounts of infrastructure and technology, which isn't free. State and federal governments offered a raft of different subsidies and programs to incentivize people to install these solar panels. Now, most of these programs were either co-payments or what are called feed-in tariffs. Now, we'll come to the subsidies, the co-payments. We'll come to that in a minute. First, let's address the feed-in tariffs, because there's a lesson here that applies to this latest idea from Albanese and his batteries. What the government offered was to buy people's solar energy off them as it was produced by their rooftop panels at hugely inflated prices, often 5 or 10 times the actual value of that electricity. They did this to make sure that the solar panels were financially attractive for those who could afford to spend the money installing them. If you got on board early, then you got guaranteed feed-in tariffs on the electricity produced by your panels, which meant that your panels were guaranteed to pay for themselves in just a few years. The thing is, that only happened because you were being paid absurdly high rates, feed-in tariffs, for your electricity, and the cost of that was being paid by other electricity users. So, in other words, their power prices went up to cover these inflated feed-in tariffs that incentivized people rich enough to afford to install the panels in the first place. I had this crazy experience about 13 years ago. I was sitting at dinner with a friend and their whole family, listening to my friend's mother and auntie, the mother's sister, talking about exactly this problem. The mother was complaining about power prices. She couldn't afford it. Even 13 years ago, power prices were rising and it was starting to bite as these programs were being rolled out. And the auntie, the sister of the mother, the person complaining about power prices, replied, "Oh, well, you should get solar panels because we've had it installed and we're not getting a bill for electricity. We're in fact being paid for our electricity." And they both thought that that was the most wonderful thing, except that unfortunately the mother in question couldn't afford to pay for the installation of her own solar panels on her house. So, because she was poorer than her sister, she was now subsidizing her sister's electricity. I tried to explain that to my friend, the fact that their opposite experiences were directly related, that the mother was struggling with power prices because of the auntie and her solar panels and the feed in tariffs, and that their mother, along with all poorer people, were now subsidizing the auntie along with all of the relatively well off. But no matter how hard I tried to explain it, they just couldn't grasp it. Now, I want to clear up one important point on this. The auntie who was making money on her electricity bill was not making money because her panels on her house were making more electricity than what she was using. No, she wasn't making money because there was now a surplus of electricity. Far from it. She was making money because the feed in tariff that she was being paid for each unit of energy that her panels produced was way higher than the price that she paid for each unit of energy that her house consumed. She was making money because she was being paid completely absurd and uneconomic prices for the power that her panels produced. And those absurd power prices were being paid by people like her sister, the mother of my friend. But needless to say, as much as it just didn't make sense, the scheme was politically popular. Schemes that rob Peter to pay Paul tend to be very popular with Paul. And if Peter doesn't realize that he's being robbed, well, he doesn't really complain too much either. In fact, he just kind of wishes that he was Paul. Rooftop solar schemes were certainly popular with anyone rich enough to pay out the thousands of dollars to get them installed. And those not rich enough? Well, they didn't think that those solar panels were the reason that their bills were so expensive, so they never twigged that one problem was directly causing the other. People like renters and homeowners who didn't have a lazy few grand burning a hole in their pocket. They didn't just miss out on the scheme, they paid for it via their power bills. But it was the success of this rooftop solar panel program that has now created a new problem which they're trying to solve. And that is the oversupply of electricity. You see, we can't control when solar panels produce power. We can only predict it within certain limits. Obviously, they produce during daylight hours, that's a given. They produce more when there's no clouds. Yeah, we can anticipate, broadly speaking, but we can't control it. The same is even more true, by the way, of wind power as well. But we need electricity when we need it. That's the beauty of coal and gas and nuclear power. We can dispatch it, we can control it, we can turn it up when we need more, and we can turn it down when we don't, within certain limits. Things like gas can ramp up much faster up and down than what something like coal can. But nevertheless, we have considerable control over the amount of power going into the grid in any moment from these baseload energy technologies. And this matters because an electricity grid has to be exactly balanced at all times. The energy going in needs to be used, or else instability occurs and things can go very badly wrong. So, matching supply with demand is vital to the survival of the grid, and the grid is vital to modern civilization. So, introducing huge amounts of electricity which we can't really control, well, that's dangerous. And with so many rooftop solar installations now in Australia, thanks to the success of the subsidies, this has become very dangerous. And it's reached the point where at times the energy prices have to go negative. Now, that sounds great. The green carpetbaggers have said that's proof of free energy, but that is far from the truth. The reason the energy market operator pushes the prices negative temporarily is because they need to either shed energy supply or increase demand fast, or the grid will collapse. The stability is at risk in those moments, so the market operator is willing to pay people to stop supplying electricity or to use more of it, regardless of whether they're using it for something useful or productive. They get paid regardless. They're doing this just to preserve the stability of the grid, which is at risk because, well, something as simple as the sun coming out on a windy day is all it takes now to threaten the stability of our power grid. So now we, the taxpayers and the payers of electricity bills, we're not only paying for the electricity produced, we're now at times paying people to stop producing. More costs for less productivity. So, what's the real solution? Well, to abandon net zero, to say net zero and get back to coal, but they're not willing to admit that. So instead, they say that the solution is energy storage. See, it goes like this. If you have enough batteries on these solar installations to store their free energy while it's abundant, while the sun is shining, then store it and send it to the grid later when it's needed, let's say on a hot night when people want to run their air conditioners, then you can smooth out the supply curve and dispatch the power on demand. Essentially, this storage makes intermittent renewables function more like reliable, dispatchable coal and gas. And from a technical perspective, they are absolutely correct. From a financial perspective, they are delusional because now they're adding an entirely new layer of infrastructure and technology to solve a problem with renewables which baseload power supplies simply don't have: the problem of storage. See, in the case of gas, coal, and nuclear, the energy is already stored. Physically, in the fuel, the coal has all that energy in it, but it'll sit there until that energy is released in the form of combustion. Same with gas. Now, nuclear, of course, works very differently, but the principle is the same. The energy is already stored for us. Nature has stored that energy. Yeah, we had to dig it up, and in the case of gas and in the case of nuclear, obviously, we've had to refine it into a more usable form. But the energy storage is inherent, it's there already. When we need more of that energy, we simply increase the combustion or the fission to convert that energy out of that physical stored form into the electricity that we need. When we need less, we decrease the rate of combustion or fission, and the energy remains stored in that object until we need it later. In the case of renewables, the energy is produced completely outside of our control, and if we don't capture it right then and there in that moment, then it's gone forever. So now, we need to spend a fortune on the mining, refining, manufacturing, transporting, and installation of all of these massive chemical batteries just to store the energy produced by the panels so that we can solve a problem which other sources of energy supply simply don't have. All we're doing with all of this money and all of this mining and industry is enabling the renewables to behave a little bit more like coal. And the costs are eye-watering. Something like $12,000 per installation of batteries, with millions of them needed all over the country, just to solve a problem which was created by spending thousands per installation on rooftop solar in the first place. That free renewable energy sure is expensive. And the government, recognising the instability created by their last renewable energy subsidy, where they made the poor pay money to the rich, have come up with a new renewable energy subsidy, where they make the poor pay money to the rich. Now, if you're rich enough to have rooftop solar and you're rich enough to install a huge and expensive battery and to store all that free energy from your huge and expensive solar panels, now poor people who can't afford any of that will help you pay for it. All so that we don't collapse the grid in our futile attempt to rush into net zero and abandon reliable baseload energy. We know that it's the poor who pay for it because Albanese says explicitly that this program will not be funded out of general revenue, which even then would still be just taxpayer funded, a money go round. No, this scheme will be added to power bills via the small scale renewable energy scheme, which means that the privileged and relatively wealthy people who can afford to install solar panels and now can afford the roughly extra $8,000 they'll have to spend up front in order to get that roughly $4,000 in free money from the government, they will continue to save or even make money on their energy bills, while those who are too poor to pay their share of the solar panels or the 70% of the batteries, they are the ones who are left with the bill, funding it all on behalf of the rich. We've seen this before. This is exactly how it worked for those rooftop solar panels in the first place. And that conversation that I overheard 13 years ago, it's still happening all over Australia today, where a relatively poor person complains about their power bills and a relatively rich person gleefully tells them, just eat cake. I mean, just get rich enough to drop $8,000 on a government scheme, and then you won't have the problem of being so poor. It's obscene. It's immoral. Economists call this regressive. Now, the concept of a progressive versus a regressive tax or policy is important, so let me explain briefly before I finish. In Australia and in most countries, our income tax system is what's called progressive. This is because people who earn more pay more, not just in absolute dollars, but also as a proportion of their income. The income tax percentage goes up as their income goes up. So a progressive system causes the relatively wealthier to pay more as a percentage of their income. A regressive system causes the relatively poorer to pay more as a percentage of their income. Now, parties like the Labor Party in Australia pride themselves on standing up for the Aussie battler, the relatively poorer workers of Australia. But in my opinion, that stopped being true decades ago, and now they write policies like this, which enrich the relatively wealthier while absolutely smashing the Aussie battlers, because these are deeply regressive policies. They don't just make poorer people pay more as a percentage of their income, they're now actually making poorer people give money to richer Australians. This is the reverse Robin Hood. The Greens love it, of course, because they are the epitome of out of touch government employed latte sipping ivory tower dwelling aristocrats. But Labor, they should be the ones railing the hardest against this stuff, this kind of punish the poor policies. But here they are trying to buy votes with them. These renewable energy schemes are disastrous. They're bad for energy prices, they're bad for our grid stability and reliability, and they are awful for poorer Australians like working battlers, pensioners, the disabled, and the like. Sadly, the reason these kinds of programs are put up in the first place is because these kinds of lies work. We, the people, get the government we deserve. And right now, that does not say good things about us. We need to wise up and fast. And you can help that happen by sharing this video so that more people can understand what's really going on with schemes like this one. My name's Topher Field. I am 100% viewer supported. No one pays me to do this. No one pays me to take certain positions or views. I'm not a shill for anybody. I'm just an Australian who can see where we're headed, and I don't like what I see. So please support my work by grabbing a copy of my books, my DVDs, my t-shirts, or my hoodies from goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com. You can follow all of my work via @TopherField, and given that there is an election on for the benefit of the AEC, I'm going to put an authorization statement at the end of this video, even though my face and my name are already all over the video, and even though absolutely no one but me has had any hand in this content or the content of any of my videos or any of my work, but whatever, it's the AEC, so I'd better keep them happy. Thanks for watching to the end. My name is Topher Field. Stay free. Authorized by Topher Field for Topher Field at Topher Field Studio.